I recommend using a third-party library to send the email. A third-party library is basically a set of include files that other people maintain. They write their code in such a way that you can include it in your project and then reference their variables and functions. For sending email, I recommend the library PHP Mailer. Let's go download that library now. You can find the PHP Mailer library on Google Code. Click on Downloads. They have a number of releases, including some release candidates and beta versions. I recommend grabbing the latest stable release. Right now, that's version 5.2.1. I'll download the zip archive here. After that downloads, find the zip archive on your hard drive and extract it. This archive has quite a few files in it. The main file is this one, class.phpmailer.php. Before we copy it over to our site, let's take a look at one of the examples on how to use it. This file here shows the most basic usage. There's some HTML here at the top that we can ignore. Let's skip down to the PHP. The first thing this code does is include the class.phpmailer.php file using the require once command. This require once command is similar to include. There are actually 4 commands we might use: include, include once, require, and require once. The difference between include and require is what happens if they encounter an error. If you use the include command and the file doesn't exist, then PHP will throw a warning, but it will still execute the rest of the code. On the other hand, if you use require and the file doesn't exist, then PHP will error and will not execute any more code. The other difference between them is how many times PHP will include the file. If you use include or require on the same file multiple times, it will load that file multiple times. This would work fine for HTML snippets like our header and footer files, but with other files, like files that create new functions, this could cause an error. The PHP mailer file is like that. We should only load it once. Go back to where you downloaded the PHP mailer code to your hard drive. Let's copy the class.phpmailer.php file over to our htdocs directory. We should put this file in our includes folder. Third-party libraries often have more than one file, so it's usually a good idea to put each library in its own folder. Now let's include the library into our contact.php file. We'll use require once, just like in the example. Let's take a look at the next line of code from the example. This line creates a new variable called mail. The first half here should look familiar, with a variable name followed by an equal sign for assigning a value. However, the code for specifying the value of the variable is probably not familiar. We've talked about simple variables and arrays so far, but this is a new type of variable, an object. You may have heard of object-oriented programming before. An object is a pretty robust type of variable. It's basically a collection of variables and functions all wrapped up together. Variables for storing information about the object, and functions for performing actions. Think of a bicycle. If a bicycle were an object, it might have variables like frame color, number of gears, and current speed. In the context of an object, these variables are called properties. It might also have some functions like brake, change speeds, and change gears. In the context of an object, these functions are called methods. Just like variables and functions, you can create your own kinds of objects, but that gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. The only reason I bring up objects here is because PHP Mailer uses an object to send an email. When you include the PHP Mailer library in your code, you have access to create a new PHP Mailer object and reference its properties and methods. Let's copy that line over to our contact.php file. We're checking right now that the form submission contains a value for email address, but we're not checking that it's a valid email address. The PHP Mailer object has a method named validateAddress that makes it easy to do this. You can access the methods and properties of an object by first specifying the object name and then by using these two characters, a hyphen and a greater than sign that together look like a single arrow. The double arrow, an equal sign and a greater than sign, is related to arrays and their keys. This single arrow is related to objects and their properties and methods. A method is a lot like a function. After the single arrow, you can specify a method name, followed by an open parenthesis, followed by an argument list, followed by a closed parenthesis. We can check the return value of this method in a conditional. This code will check if the email address is valid. Let's use the negation operator here to check if the email address is not valid. If it's not valid, we want to display an error message and stop executing the file. Let's take a look at this new check in the browser. I'll fill out all the values, but I'll specify an invalid value for email address. We now have our third-party library in place, and we've used it to validate the form. We're finally ready to send that email.